Over the last year, if you never fell for any of the fabricated Justin Jefferson rumors, good for you. But if you did, is there anything we can learn from that? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to my hashtag everydayers, those of you who actually come in and listen every single day, especially this time of year when we're in June, we're in the dead area. Absolutely appreciate you. I guess we do have minicamp going on, but appreciate you nonetheless. And if you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Luke. You can find the Locked On Vikings podcast by searching out anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search Locked On Vikings, whether it's a listening app like SiriusXM or anywhere else, including YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Today is Twitter Thursday. Usually we do this on Tuesday. Obviously, we had some other things to talk about. We're still kind of talking about Justin Jefferson. A lot of the questions in this mailbag are Justin Jefferson. If you ever have any questions for me, you can send them to me via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. You can also fill out the Google form in the show notes, or I'll usually put out a call on Twitter on Monday. So, first one comes from James Rapine's burner account. It just says, damn it. Okay, so the reason I'm starting with this is there's lore you have to know. So, there is this account that has been filling out the Google form called James Rapine's burner account. If you don't know, James Rapine is a host of Locked On Bengals, always asking about a Justin Jefferson trade. And I thought that it was just James Rapine himself being funny. It's exactly the kind of thing that he would do. It's not. It's just one of his listeners. And personally, I think that is so much funnier, and so does he. So whoever you are, kudos. This has been a great bit. Sports Guy 709 asks, now that the extension is signed, we know that Justin Jefferson will automatically be unhappy 4 years from now and that the Vikings may have to trade him before the 2028 season for the worst trade package you've ever heard in your life. Your thoughts? Look, if we get to that point, Jefferson will already be 28. So the discourse surrounding like a possible third contract will be like, but he's going to be in his 30s and stuff. And you know, what does that do to the value? The cap will be like $600 million by then or something. So it'll like the numbers won't make any sense in our brains. There'll be all kinds of stupid stuff in that, but I think we can learn something from this discourse. And I tried. All right. If you thought that like he was that like if you were really worried, if you spent a moment of your time being anxious about Justin Jefferson, just know that I tried, but you never had a reason to be. Throughout the entire process, there never seemed to be any issue between the two sides. No tension outside of what you would normally expect during a contract negotiation. There were no credible reports. There were a lot of non-credible reports about like somebody trading, but it has now come out through basically anybody who has a reputation that they're willing to put on the line that's worth a damn. That, yeah, a lot of teams called and the Vikings never really gave that idea the time of day. The second Jefferson came out of their mouths, they hung up. It was fine. They got really close to an extension. They almost got it done early. That would have been sick. Jefferson decided, this is the way Schefter put it, which Schefter is very definitely running interference for an agent here, so you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, but essentially the argument is, well, he thought maybe after one more year the deal could be bigger, and yeah, it did get bigger because the cap went up more than everybody thought, so I guess he was right. And then they got the deal done with very little drama. The only drama was the stuff drummed up in the meantime. But they didn't do any, like during the season, they didn't sit down and try to do the contract anymore. You know, they didn't do it during the draft or anything like that either. So they just like once they decided, okay, hey, let's resume this, it was pretty easy. And the thing just sat there on pause for a while, and everyone was fine with that because everybody agreed to do that while they focused on other things. So if you got anxious during that time, you got lied to. And I'm sorry that you got lied to. I think it's important in those times to back out a little bit and kind of say, okay, what's really happening here? Is this timeline actually weird? And it actually isn't. I mean, other 2020 draft picks are all in their contract negotiations right now and all on their about to play on their fifth year options. Like it's the same calendar for everybody else. It would have been early for Jefferson. So yeah, they are like, it was early for Penei Sewell. He got done a year early. That's the anomaly. And Jefferson maybe would have been the anomaly, but decided not to be for what turned out to be a pretty good reason. Next one comes from Bradley Knorr, who asks, why do contract negotiations take months or even years to conclude? Feels like a contract negotiation would be more of a back and forth conversation, but there must be more that goes into it. And why do they usually happen before training camp? I think the answer to both of these questions is just the nature of the NFL calendar. So with Jefferson, they tried to get it done early, and then they just sort of hit pause on it until the normal time to resume it. And so that meant it, quote unquote, took 10 more months, but nothing happened in those months. They just said, okay, we just are not going to pick this. We're going to go do the season, and then we're going to go do free agency, and then the draft and all this other stuff. And we'll just make sure that you get it done before you miss out on anything mandatory or have to decide whether or not to hold out on anything mandatory. I think that was the true deadline they were trying to get it done for, and they did. And that's the reason that it happens before training camp, right? But also just because that's when the player is physically there. Like Justin Jefferson did not spend a lot of the last 5 months in Minnesota physically. He went around the country. He did stuff I'm sure he had to go around the country for the new Netflix show, the Receiver show that's coming out that he's part of. He had engagements, he had endorsement stuff to do, working out somewhere, that's not necessarily Minnesota. There's a whole bunch and he did come back to Minnesota. He went to Wolves games. He did a thing with kids at US Bank Stadium, but once you're all in training camp, everyone's there. The agent's there. It's just physical proximity. So easier to get a deal done. Not Your Father's Dopamine asks, only looking at it from a pass catcher perspective, which group do you think brings more value to the 2024 Vikings offense? The wide receiver room after JJ and Addison, or the tight end room after TJ? I think it's an easy tight end room because you said offense. If you wanted to say special teams, you maybe could make an argument that there's something there with Brandon Powell, but I think Josh Oliver carries this category entirely. And it sounds like Robert Tunyon's actually having a pretty good OTAs as well. Maybe you've got something there. But even without him, I think Josh Oliver blows this out. He's a guy with a real role that he's really good at. And as much as I like Brandon Powell as a depth receiver, he's still far more replaceable than someone like Oliver, I guess, in my opinion. Minnesota Sports Appreciator asks, earlier this week, you talked about how Tunyon went from QB to wide receiver to tight end. How difficult do you think this could be if N'Keal Harry actually made the switch? Here's another thing that has come up this week. I mentioned it yesterday really briefly. N'Keal Harry moving to tight end, and apparently he's been bulking up for a while because they told him a long time ago that he was going to do it. And I think the presence of Robert Tunyon helps this a lot because you've got somebody right next to you that did it. That can be okay, when I was going through this, here's what Eric Ebron told me, right? There's this this passing down of knowledge. I don't love the chances of it just because we're really late in his career and there's not a lot of precedent for that. But the other thing is, by the time this is out, you'll probably be able to listen to Minnesota Football Party as well. And I'm going to ask Ron Johnson, who also did this for the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to ask him kind of the same question. So he'll probably have a better answer for you. Berserker asks, are the Vikings starting to panic at tight end? So no, and there's a bunch of reasons that we know that. For one, N'Keal Harry just isn't that serious of a player. For two, you have to take Alec Lewis's opinion on this, but he's been at OTAs watching, and he says Robert Tunyon's doing great. So for whatever that's worth, it seems like he's doing fine. They also seem to be considering the possibility that TJ Hawkinson is back before week 6, which would mean that everything is fine and it's just a few weeks you got to cover. But I think the big one is the fact that they told N'Keal Harry months ago that they were thinking about doing this with him before they signed Tunyon. If you want to think about panic, our tight end room isn't quite as good as we think it is. That move would have been Tunyon. And that happened before they saw anything. It's not this world where they got to OTAs and they thought the room would be good, and they got to the OTAs and they're like, oh my God, this room is bad. Everyone panic. Let's move N'Keal Harry. No, I don't think that's something you do in a Madden franchise, but I don't know if he makes the team at wide receiver or at tight end. This is just a guy we're trying to figure out a way to make him a valuable player. There may be panicking in the world of N'Keal Harry's career. But people had talked to N'Keal Harry about it a lot, and apparently the Vikings were the only team to actually seriously say, okay, let's actually try this. So he's been bulking up, and we'll see how it goes. I have more questions to answer here, so we're going to keep it rolling here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by BetterHelp. If you've been thinking about giving therapy a try, check out BetterHelp. They can help you get set up with a therapist that works for you. They'll match someone they think is right for you. And the best part is, if that ends up not being a great match, you can switch for no additional charge. BetterHelp is there to help you get started in therapy. And I think everybody should be in therapy. I think it's just a great way, like assuming you can afford it, I think it's a great way to keep your mental health on lock. And even if things are going great, it's still kind of good to keep up with the Joneses. But when there is a problem, it's good to have somebody on call that can help you process that isn't like someone you have a personal relationship with and you have to be like careful what you tell them. I don't know. It's been helpful to me. If you want to get into therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thanks a million for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, go to Locked On Minnesota Sports, the YouTube channel. Click on the live tab, and you can find a 24/7 streaming channel, all things Minnesota sports all the time. Moving on with this Twitter Thursday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. The next question comes from Josh, who asks, could McCarthy or Sam Darnold actually help solve the issue of Justin Jefferson being taken away with double teams? Kirk seemed to be a very by-the-book QB and would look elsewhere if the coverage dictated what that JJ would be covered. Could a new QB who looks for him regardless of what the coverage tells them that they should do help the offense in that sense? They might do that, but I don't think that would be a good idea. I don't think that makes for a more productive offense. It makes for better fantasy stats for Justin Jefferson maybe, but forcing every single target, no matter the context, to your best player is a really bad idea. Defenses, they get paid too, right? Like if you do that, like they will punish you. I'm hoping that Darnold and McCarthy don't like use Jefferson as a crutch. But like, I don't think that did kind of happen to the offense with Kirk Cousins as well. And he had like the offense as a whole, not just Cousins, had to learn when Jefferson went down with that hamstring injury, how to exist without him. And I do think that was like a healthy exercise, but as with all things, I think the key is balance. Cole24 asks, do you think Aaron Jones will get more rushing attempts over Ty Chandler, or will it be more of a balanced attack with both? My prediction for this is that you get 2 Ty Chandler drives a game and everything else is Aaron Jones until fatigue or like health becomes a problem. But I don't think that Ty Chandler is like a serious threat to Aaron Jones's job security or anything like that, unless he shows to be like super, super washed. But that's not what the beat reporters have been seeing at OTAs. Nate Walton asks, what kind of things did you think Dwayne McBride needed to work on to get some carries on the main roster? Boy, you're going to have to go back to preseason Locked On Vikings episodes for this. I do not really remember. I know that with Ty Chandler, I had a vision issue with him all year, including in the preseason. I think with Dwayne McBride, I had an even worse one. Where I kind of saw like he was like a step or two late to make the decision, and you just don't have that many steps to spare. I think, if I remember. I can't remember what was Kenny's problem and what was Chandler's problem and what was McBride's problem. There was also, I think, some pass protection issues, which sucks because he was really good at that in college. Oatmeal Raisin Cookie Lover, I still love that username, you are cooking, asks, what do you think the plan is or should be for wide receiver 3? Do we mostly see formations featuring Jefferson, Addison, and Naylor based on his training camp hype the past couple of years? Or do we see Powell play out of the slot with JJ and Addison on the outside? He also was like, what about a third option? But no, I think that those are the options. I don't really see. I mean, N'Keal Harry's not even a receiver anymore. I don't think Trent Scherf, he's playing with the threes. He's catching passes from JJ McCarthy down there. So I think that those are kind of your 4 main guys right now. And it's Naylor versus Powell on, and I guess a little bit of Tristan Jackson getting some reps. We'll see. I mean, that bodes well for his roster odds. I don't know if he's going to like go earn a start. There's a long way to go for that. But I think it's a camp competition is the answer to that question. Is what happens, who does better in preseason? There's your answer. If I had to guess, I would probably say I believe a little bit more in Powell than Naylor. Naylor losing kind of basically the entire year to an injury and coming back and being relegated to clear out duty kind of told me that maybe he wasn't the like, hey, we're really going to work this guy in kind of dude. Like maybe he was just kind of there to take up space when he came back, but also he missed a whole bunch of the season. So that might not even be fair. But yeah, I think, and plus Powell looked great in shorts last year. So if this is going to be evaluated like in shorts, that bodes well for him too. So that would be my prediction on that. But as always, it'll come down to who plays better. Rob Meek asks, now that we've seen Jefferson and Cousins' contracts, was it possible for the Vikings to have signed both players? Yes. That, like, unequivocally, yes. Kind of no matter how bad faith you are. Like, you could just take his he's 25 mil for the Falcons right now. And if you just ported that over to the Vikings, they have 27.7 in cap space, so they would be good. It'd be obviously tight, but it also wouldn't work that way. If they had given Cousins the exact same contract, because Cousins had void years and stuff on his contract, right now he costs 28.5 mil against the Vikings in dead cap, and that would have spread back out. So he actually would have, like, it wouldn't just be that he becomes a player that costs $53.5 million in dead cap, or like he wouldn't have like a $53 million cap hit. It would be different. So all of that 25 wouldn't just tack right on. Also, the Vikings probably would have given him a different contract in light of that and their situation. But the reason was that the Vikings didn't do it with Kirk was never that they couldn't afford him. They could afford him if they wanted him. They were not so motivated to. And that's the reality that I think a lot of like the really diehard Kirk Cousins fans just don't really want to think, oh, it was just because of the cap situation. They didn't want him that much. They didn't like him. Hey, if he goes and balls out for Atlanta, we get to say, hey, you were stupid for that. But like, they didn't want him that much. They didn't want him without a rookie quarterback waiting in the wings to take over. And Cousins did not want that situation. So who knows what the actual offer ended up being with Cousins, but the way it played out, the Vikings were upfront about it and said, you know, we are going to draft a quarterback. We were maybe going to draft a quarterback last year if things fell a different way, but we didn't, and we're going to do it this year. And Cousins didn't want that, so he left. It's the way it is. He didn't want to have a rookie quarterback waiting in the wings, and now he does in Atlanta, and that's very funny. And my goodness, but that's not our problem anymore. But problem was never money. And it was never money from the whole get-go. I've been really steadfast about that. Cap terrorists, eat your heart out. I've got a few more questions to get to, so we'll keep on rolling with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. Whether you're trying to get to maybe a Vikings game, tickets are out. You can go check them out at Gametime, or you can go try to get to a Twins game maybe, or if you're in the area to get to like the NBA Finals, whatever it is, sporting events as well as comedy, theater, concerts, whatever. Find it at Gametime. At Gametime, you get all-in pricing. That means that there are no hidden fees. You can toggle on a thing that shows you what you will pay at checkout when all is said and done. They're really upfront with you about that, and they're really upfront with you about their seat views. You can go view a panorama and make sure that you are satisfied with the view from that seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. A few more questions to get to here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. The next one comes from Nolan M., who asks, listen to today's Kindred Schools ep in which they broadly compared McCarthy's style to Purdy's. I heard that too. Got me thinking, if what O'Connell sees is a potential Brock Purdy with arm talent, could this be a sign that he wants to shift the offense closer to what San Francisco ran last year? So a couple things, that's already happening. They already have basically followed the kind of jumped off of the McVay path and onto the Shanahan path. And that's Josh Oliver and CJ Ham. That was a big talker last offseason. But I don't really agree with the McCarthy-Purdy comparison in total. I don't want people to think that. I don't think the Kindred Skulls guys were trying to do that. They were just saying, like, in this particular way, it like reminds me of him. And it was like a much more specific take. It wasn't like a broad comparison. There's a lot of stuff that Purdy does that's a lot different. He's way more improvisational than McCarthy. McCarthy is way more willing to kind of stay in structure, and Purdy loves to go outside of structure and like make kind of hero ball plays. That sort of magic that he conjures was both part of why the 49ers were able to make it as far as they were, but also why people are skeptical about their ability to do it again. Because it was very like Case Keenum 2017, like kind of hooping. And McCarthy's not really he has that improv gene and he can use it when he needs it, but he doesn't rely on it as much as Purdy does, I guess. Which can be both a good thing and a bad thing. Waleed asks, who out of the 2022 draft class, primarily focusing on Sean Booth and Asamoah in particular, do you expect to make the 53-man roster this year, if any? Booth, I think for sure. Booth is, I think, gaining favor with the Vikings staff, at least the way that his snap counts increased last year. Obviously, that was with like Byron Murphy out. But he got in, and I think he acquitted himself reasonably, if I recall. So that gives him a little bit of momentum going into this year, and maybe he can like carve himself out a role if he can, compete his way into at least a backup job, right? Plus, he plays really well on special teams, and that's important. So I think him on the roster is a pretty easy bet. I think Asamoah is a similar thing. Plus, that linebacker room is just not as competitive. Like, you've got a lot of undrafted free. Like, you basically just have to beat out undrafted rookies, and I don't think we're gonna Ivan Pace this again. You lost Hicks, you gained Cashman, so like that's no additional roster pressure. And he was third on the group last time, or fourth on the group with no Troy Dye, who is now gone. So it's like Common Grugier Hill, that's how he says it. Common Grugier Hill, and then a bunch of undrafted rookies. So I think there's like no real pressure against Asamoah's roster spot. Might as well keep him on the team. Scene is the one that I think I'd be really worried about because that safety group has just totally leapfrogged him, and because he doesn't excel on special teams. Yeah, he did play special teams as a rookie, and that was how he got hurt. And he didn't play special teams at all last year. He didn't look good at special teams when I saw him at camp last year. That would have to increase because at this point, just keeping him on the roster on first-round pedigree by year 3, that's really hard to justify. You got to show me something now. And so I could see that maybe being your sort of it's going to be everyone's like my surprise cut for 2024. And I don't think it's going to be that surprising because everyone's predicting it. Hjort asks, we constantly read about former Viking coaches who turn into good head coaches elsewhere, law of large numbers. Today, Stefanski got a contract extension, making him the latest former Vike to do so. My question to you is, which coach will follow his path? I always want to challenge people who have like seller's remorse about Stefanski. And I say, well, okay, so what if they kept Mike Zimmer and they won one playoff game since 2019 was what, or since 2020. They won one. No, they would win one playoff game. And then otherwise they would make the playoffs once. So 2 playoff appearances, 1 win. Would you be happy with that as keeping Mike Zimmer? Because that's what Stefanski has done with the Browns. 1 playoff win, and that was in 2020, the Baker Mayfield beating the Steelers. And then they made it to the playoffs last year with the weird Flacco mania, and that's it. They've been like a middling team ever since. They had the Deshaun Watson albatross. Like, the Browns are currently sitting in the position that everybody that hated what Mike Zimmer was and wanted to fire him for Stefanski wanted to avoid. Like, they wanted to not be in that we're stuck with an expensive quarterback that's, that, and we can't build the right team around him, and we can only, we are bumping our heads on this ceiling, and, we can never find sustained success. That is exactly what the Browns are, and they sold their souls to do it. I don't think you would trade where the Vikings are now for Stefanski. That's my point on that. In terms of like former coaches, I think the only real major one I can think of is Mike Tomlin. Like, Shermer went to go be the head coach of the Giants. That flamed out. Norv Turner never really got another major opportunity, and then he eventually retired. I'm thinking more recent examples. Like, obviously, you could go back like to Pete Carroll, way back in the 80s and stuff if you want to go to all the like Buddy Ryan and all that. But thinking of like recent examples of, we just don't know. Like Jerry Gray, is he D coordinator? He's not. He's still just D-backs coach in Green Bay, which he left to try to get better opportunities, and he's not getting them. Oh, I apologize. He's the assistant head coach / defense for the Atlanta Falcons. That actually is, I think, a real job there. So good for that. Good for him there, I guess. But like, that's not, I don't know if that's like, they finally got out of Minnesota, and then it's like a take that you hear from people who want to paint Minnesota as this farm team. People that I think they're like too used to all Minnesota sports, because the Twins were that for a while. Timberwolves were that for like 15 years. And like where you finally get good and you go leave, especially after Kevin Garnett left, everybody felt that way really, really intensely. And I think people are still hanging on to that. But anyways, in terms of what coach is on the staff right now that I think could get a head coaching job elsewhere and be successful, and he said I'm not allowed to say Flores because that's boring, and I agree. it's Keenan McCardell. He's got the name recognition because of his status as a former player who was on everybody's fantasy team, so the media will be into it. That's all you need. But he also has like the genuine respect of everyone around him. He has gained the respect of so many receivers at all of his different stops. And he's on the offensive side of the ball and on the passing game side of the ball, which is going to help a lot when you're thinking about head coaches. So I would say Keenan McCardell is the answer there. I don't think Wes Phillips, even though he has the Phillips name and all that, I don't think he's getting enough. He's going to be in that Andre Patterson world, that George Edwards world, where he's just not going to get enough credit for anything good the offense does because O'Connell will get all of it. So I think he'll be stuck there until like whatever his next stop is, right? That leaves us with, I think, McCardell, a bunch of other position coaches that are pretty green. Ed Helinski asks, how hopeful are you about a good Viking season, or might this just be a season of transition? I think it's a season of transition. They've got Sam Darnold playing games. They got a rookie playing. And like, look, the rookie could explode. They could CJ Stroud this. Like, who knows, right? Sky's the limit. But I wouldn't like set expectations. And I think what I have learned, and this is what I'll leave you with here, what I've learned over, this will be my sixth full season covering the Minnesota Vikings on Locked On Vikings. And what I've learned here is that expectations are stupid. Good expectations, bad expectations. What should our expectations be? Set no expectations. Set neutral expectations. Maybe that's better. Just go in and watch the games. Whatever happens, happens. I don't know. They'll win 5 games and they'll win 10 or they'll win 8 or 9. I could say all the numbers over some point and then post a clip later and say that I was right because I got them all. But it's too unpredictable of a league to just like predetermine what a team's future is. You know, they've got their over under. I think it's 6.5, 7. I think, or maybe it's 7 at FanDuel. The betting markets, which reflects public opinion, I would say, don't think the Vikings will be very serious this season. And it's very common for teams with a rookie quarterback to have like an unserious season. And I think there's a big difference between that and the idea of like, well, let's be really bad to get a draft pick, because there's no plan there. You're just amassing assets, but you don't have a vision. You're not building something. You don't have an architecture for the team that you're trying to build with this kind of quarterback. And here's your receivers. And this is how we're going to allocate those resources. You're just piling up stuff. And that has historically been a really bad way to go about it. You need a vision. You need to really want to build something. That's what got the Lions out of hell, right? I think the Lions are proof positive of all of this. They spent 20 years amassing resources and getting high draft picks by, finishing in the bottom 10 every year. All of it just failed because some GM came in, had way too much stuff, and built without a vision. But Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell had a vision for this gritty, run first heavy team that, kneecap biting and all that stuff, like this culture that they wanted to build, and they built it, and that has been successful. I think that is the key difference. That's what got the Lions out of hell, and that is, if you want a reason for positivity, somebody else asked, like, why is everybody positive about the Vikings? They are in the worst team in the division, and they had a bad offseason. It's like, you just want to be mad. But which, like, you're welcome to be mad, but like, why? Everybody else doesn't need to be mad with you. But like, if you want a reason for positivity, it's the long-term outlook here, not the short-term outlook. The short-term outlook is they're transitioning into something. And I have a much easier time being patient with that when I can tell that there's a vision on the other end of it, that they're building to something and it's a work in progress and there's scaffolding up and there's, the yard's all dug up right now. It's not pretty yet, but you can tell that something is being built here and it's not just a haphazard throwing around of assets. That's what you want. Tomorrow we'll probably do a long Everyman series. I've got some really cool ones in the chamber here, some really good stories that deserve kind of their own full episode. So we'll do that unless something else pops up. Till then, I'll see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.